Waking Up, third class, October 10th, 1999. So let's begin. Good afternoon. Good to see you all here again. Today it seems like I'm going to be talking about a bunch of M's. We have the material world, or materialism, and we have metaphysics, and we have mysticism, and corresponding to the material world or materialism we have matter, and corresponding to metaphysics we have mind, and corresponding to mysticism we have the mystical experience. And I think it's sort of fun that they're all M's. So this is the M and M and M and M and M and M and M class. And there's not much to say about materialism and matter because we all already know a great deal about that. We're conditioned from birth, at least, to believe in the reality of matter in the material world and believe in our separateness from God and our individuality and our personal power and our ability to some extent to control our environment and overcome things or be overcome by things. And that's the experience that we've all had, and that's the experience that doesn't work, and that's the experience that brings the suffering and discomfort, and that's the experience that brings us all here. So I don't think we'll spend any time on that particular part of this, of the M's. At the other end is mysticism, and mysticism is something that can't be talked about. Mysticism is the mystical experience is the experience of the absolute oneness of all that is. And that's the goal, to have that experience. That's what we're striving for. That's why we're studying, and to lift us high enough to meditate. And that's why we're meditating, so that we can start having glimpses of the experience of the presence of God, or the experience of oneness. And we can just refer to it as the experience of the presence of God, the actual feeling of the presence of God. We will have that experience as a result of meditation after however long it takes for each of us to get sufficiently high to have that experience. And then that experience will repeat more and more frequently, and the experience will last for longer and longer periods of time until you can essentially be in that experience at will. Or you can have a cataclysmic experience like Robert had, or like Byron Katie had, or something, and Robert was thrown into that experience permanently, but we don't anticipate that happening to us in this group. But the whole story on the mystical side is all there is God. That's the oneness. That's the experience of oneness. God is consciousness. Consciousness is God. Those words are interchangeable: God, consciousness, awareness. And so consciousness, well, God is the only creator, and God creates in consciousness, because that's all God is. God is consciousness, and God creates in consciousness. The expression I love is that, consciousness is the creator and the substance of everything. And, the only way I know that we can talk about it, I was about to say what this means, but this is not what this means at all, but a way that we can talk about it is that we can think that this consciousness creates by having ideas. It has an idea, and that idea is now an idea in consciousness, and that has existence. It's not unlike in a very small way, what we do when we dream. When we dream, all there is our consciousness. And in that dream, we create this whole dream. And there's this whole world, there's this space, there's this time, there's these people, there's these events. And all of that is taking place in our own personal consciousness. It has no reality as far as any material existence. The time has no reality as far as any time, because a 4-hour dream happens typically in 1 or 2 seconds. The space in which that dream took place has no reality. When you wake up, where is that space? Where is that city? Where is that bar? Where is that restaurant? Where is that scene you were in? It doesn't exist. It never did exist. It's all in consciousness. God is consciousness, and God's creation is in consciousness. And part of God's creation in consciousness is us, the Christ consciousness, the Christ, the Buddha mind, that aspect of God which results in this experience that we're having. And God is so creative that God made that aspect of itself creative, which is that we, in the reality of us, are totally creative, and we create our own experience exactly as God is creating all of everything that God creates in God's consciousness. So within that consciousness, we as individual expressions of God are creative, and we create our experience. I mentioned this in a previous class, but I want to do it again, go over it again. We have this idea that matter out there is causing our experience. And for something to be in our experience, it means that it must be in our consciousness. If we're not conscious of something, it's not in our experience. I'm not asking you to buy this or believe it or take it home or anything, but hear it. Hear this flip on our conditioning, on our current concept. Everything that we experience is necessarily in our consciousness, because if it's not in our consciousness, we're not conscious of it. So our entire experience is taking place within our consciousness. Now we have this story that this content of our consciousness is a reflection of some external reality, which is, material things out there which are producing light and sounds and touches and feelings and stuff. But all those material things out there, for them to be out there, have to be in our consciousness. So you really can't go that way. There's no way of proving that there's anything out there that's causing this experience. In fact, there's no place for it to be, because everything that we're experiencing is within our consciousness. If you go to your biology books, you will discover that an object out there is supposed to make a sound, and that sound causes air to vibrate, and air vibrating causes your eardrum to vibrate, and your eardrum vibrating causes various neurological things to happen inside your ear, and those various neurological things cause synapses to fire, and there's these little electrical synapses and things running around inside your brain, and it's all a matter of electricity in there. And yet our experience is not electricity running around inside of meat. Our experience is sound. Where did the idea of sound come from? Well, we've never heard sound. Sound is in our concept. What we're getting from outside is eardrums vibrating and retinas doing chemical things and skin being depressed. We're not getting any of this stuff. It's all in our consciousness, and and that's that was a problem that I encountered many, many years ago, and I convinced myself that I could not prove that there was anything out there. And subsequently, as a result of my mystical work, I've discovered that that's the reality, that it's all happening in consciousness. My favorite axiom of the infinite way is that everything that we experience is an outpicturing of the content of our own consciousness. And see, this is what God in its creativity has done. It has made us creative so that we create our experience exactly as God created its experience. God created this wonderful experience so that it could know what God is, because without any concept of anything other than God, it couldn't know what it was. And part of that which it created is this wonderfully creative individual expressions. And now we're creating our experience. And our experience is a reflection of what we believe. Nothing, we can't possibly experience anything we can't conceive of. If you can't conceive of it, it doesn't happen for you. There's a wonderful biological fact. Frogs only see movement. They don't see things that are stationary. So frogs, if they're looking at something, and you put a meter on the optic nerve, nothing's happening. There's no input on the optic nerve, and then a fly goes by, and there's a big pulse and a signal, and the frog pops out its tongue and nails the fly, but there's no input on the optic nerve even. So the frog obviously couldn't possibly have a experience of a rock, because the rock's stationary. So there are no rocks in a frog's consciousness. And that fact I encountered 100 years ago, and began to wonder what there is that doesn't transmit on my optic nerve. But then subsequently I've discovered that nothing transmits on my optic nerve. Notice my optic nerve is within my consciousness. It's not that my optic nerve is leading to my consciousness. My optic nerve is within my consciousness, which brings all sorts of other things. It's not that my consciousness is in my body, in my brain. I'm conscious of my body. Therefore, my body is within my consciousness. And in fact, as I tell some people when they are afraid of flying, I say, well, don't worry about it. The airplane's in your consciousness. You're not in the airplane. The airplane's in you. The airplane's in your consciousness. There's nothing to worry about. The way it appears to work is there is this thing called mind, which Meg Johnson has a wonderful tape on mind and really cleared this whole area up so nicely. She's one of Joel Goldsmith's students, and she cleared this stuff up so nicely for me. Then I went back and read Joel and discovered that it was there all along, but I needed somebody to sort it for me. She says that she was very curious about what Joel meant when he said mind. And so she went into meditation and prayer, and she prayed about what is mind. She just asked God. She says, God, what is mind? What is mind? And the answer came to her, you're looking at it. And she says, what does that mean? And began to think about it. And what that means, that's exactly a statement that what we're looking at is space, is what we call the material world, and the answer is that that's mind. The answer is that the material world is within consciousness, and what mind is the content of consciousness. That's your current picture. That's what you're seeing. The universe is God's picture. God created this. Actually, what we see as the universe is our concept of God's picture, but the universe is God's picture, and our experience is our picture. And this is what is meant when people talk about, we're talking about metaphysics, by the way. This is what metaphysics is all about. Metaphysics is about the power of the mind, and actually it's the power of consciousness over mind. The metaphysics term is that mind creates matter, or matter is mind externalized, or we could just as easily say, that matter is mind. When we have a concept about something, that becomes matter. And you do that in dreams. You can perfectly well dream that you're at a coffee bar having coffee with somebody, and you can knock on the table and it feels hard. So that don't get locked up about the fact that mind can't have texture, because it happens to us every night in our dreams that we dream about mind, and it has weight and substance and taste and touch and smell and all those things. And if I come up to you in your dream and sit down at your coffee table with you and say, this is all a dream, you will very strongly deny that fact. There's no effective difference between this. Another gift God gave us is that not only did He make us creative, but He also allowed us to be creative in the sense of doing dreams too, so that we not only can do this level of dream, which is the big dream, but we can also do individual dreams so that we have something to observe, so that we can recognize the possibility of all of this. Otherwise it would be fairly inconceivable to us. Metaphysics is about the power of mind over matter, and the original Christian Science healing and unity healing and the various healing techniques were about using mind to correct matter, and voodoo is mind over matter. Voodoo is the recognition that mind is a power and creates and changes matter. And there's good kahunas in Hawaii and bad kahunas in Hawaii, and these are people who have learned that mind is a power and that mind can alter matter. And black magic and white magic is about that, and the Black Brotherhood and the White Brotherhood is about that, and all of this stuff is about the fact that matter is an externalization of mind, and given sufficient training of the mind and given sufficient mind power, matter changes. But the problem with getting into that is you're still in a power situation. Just like in matter, you gotta, in matter you're trying to take charge of your situation, so you've got to be more powerful than somebody else. Well, in mind, you've got to have your mind that's more powerful than somebody else's mind, and that's all sidetracks. That's all just sidetracks. That's all has nothing to do with God's reality. All of this mind that we're in is a concept of God's creation. And let me do one more thing here, and then we'll see if we can tie it together. There's really only one mind, and it's God's mind, and there's really only one consciousness, and it's God's consciousness. And when I say we have our own creativity and our own mind, we are within God's consciousness and God's mind, and we are an aspect of that as our individual selves, as ourselves as the individual expression of God. Now, that individual expression of God, like everything else in God's universe, starts at a point of ignorance. The universe had a creation point. Oak trees come out of acorns. Babies turn into people. Minnows turn into fish. Everything starts at the basic level. People start as two cells and become people, become babies, become people. Everything starts at nothing and develops to its full maturity, and people become, with any luck at all, mature adult people, and acorns, with any luck at all, become oak trees, and the universe is expanding and doing whatever it's going to do. Everything starts at a stage of simplicity and ignorance. And so did our consciousnesses. This consciousness which God created as part of this wonderful experiment that God, as part of God's wonderful game with itself, started in ignorance. And what appears to us as this spiritual path is the process of that acorn growing into an oak tree, of that consciousness growing into its realization of its oneness with God. I mean, the answer to the final exam is you always were God. You're God from the start, you were God from the end. There never was anything but God. You're a piece of God in God's consciousness, and that's the answer. But the ignorance is that we're separate, and the ignorance is that we're alone, and the ignorance is that we're individual, and the ignorance is that we have to do it ourselves since we're separate and we don't have an experience of God. And that went somewhere and I just lost it. Well, the ignorance is the thing which leads to this process. Now, part of another really neat thing about, in fact, the necessity of mind, if you will, for us to go through this process is that mind outpictures our consciousness, as God's mind outpictures God's consciousness, God's creation. So our mind outpictures our concept of this creation, with all its flaws, and with all its ignorance, and with all its untruths, and with all its lies, and with all its truths, and all its wondrous discoveries. So our experience is continually an outpicturing of our current state of consciousness. Now, we all share the one mind, and when we take a human body and come into this world, we're in human consciousness, we're born with human consciousness, and we're conditioned by human parents and human teachers and human clergy and human movies and human books and human television shows and all these things. And these all represent the current human belief, the current human consciousness, which is that the material world is true and that matter is real and that we have to take care of ourselves and we have to be stronger than the next guy and quicker than the next guy and brighter than the next guy and take care, and that we're isolated and separate. And that's the lie that needs to be overcome. That's the ignorance that that we're working to recognize the truth of. Wow, going fast. There's a lot of stuff here. And it's so hard to present it in a way that ties together. Let's see where we go. Okay, there's one place we need to go. Funny, it's flowing through so fast that sometimes I can't get hold of it enough to say it. If we do nothing at all as far as spiritual work, as far as doing work on our consciousness, then we get human consciousness. Because that's what's being taught us, that's what we're conditioned to believe, and that's what's being continuously radiated at us because there is one consciousness. And if we're attuned to human consciousness, we get human consciousness and the human understanding and the human experience. Some of the steps towards enlightenment include doing reading of spiritual stuff, and those of you who work with me have heard that I always say make certain that the source of your reading or the tapes that you're hearing is a master. one who knows the truth so that you can really hear it, rather than somebody who's writing a commentary on what somebody else said about somebody else, or somebody who thinks they're a master. Make sure that you're hearing from a master. But the reason we study truth is to break down the conditioning and allow us to accept the possibility that there is another experience, i.e. the God consciousness, that there is something more than this locked-in matter. And what we're doing right now is I'm breaking down that conditioning as hard as I can. And of course it can't be broken down in a half an hour, but I can take a chip out of it here and there. And as this filters back up to you, you will perhaps find that your experience reflects some of what I'm talking about. So we do the regular work at hearing truth, reading truth, seeing truth, hearing truth, in order to crack the conditioning so that we can start to get input from the metaphysical side, start to hear God, if you will. And as we do that work, and as we practice meditation, and we don't need to do these half-hour meditations, we need to do 3-minute meditations or 4 or 5-minute meditations. The idea is that we're opening a channel to have the other experience, which is the mystical experience, the experience I called as feeling the presence of God. Joel's book, Practicing the Presence, is such a wonderful place to start. Spending your day practicing the presence of God, practicing the awareness of the presence of God, is as direct a step as any towards leading you to that first glimpse, that first experience, that first click. And when you have it, there'll be no doubt about it. You will never doubt this whole thing again. So we read truth and we study truth so that we can hear things like, understand what books like Practicing the Presence are saying, and we do the practice, the meditation practice, and we do the various practice in order to develop our intuition, which AA, for example, rightly comments on as the way of getting truth is the intuitive truth. That's exactly consistent with this. And we have the experience. We start to have little clicks, little truths, little answers that we didn't get ourselves, or we hear something in a book, we read something in a book or hear something in a tape and say, oh, and you suddenly hear what the person is saying. We get these little clicks, and this is the process that develops us, develops our consciousness. Now the really good news is that every little click, every little truth that you get replaces one of the lies in your consciousness. And your entire experience is an outpicturing of the content of your consciousness. So every little click changes your life experience. The picture must change when the content of your consciousness changes. Every time you learn a truth instead of a lie, this must reflect it. Your consciousness, you are now conscious of that truth, and you are no longer conscious of the lie. And if you're not conscious of it, it's not in your consciousness, it's not in your experience. And if you are conscious of it, it is in your consciousness, it is in your experience. So it's necessarily true that as we gather truth, our life changes. And the truth, fortunately, is a truth of harmony and love and bliss and ecstasy and grace and abundance and omnipotence and omniscience and omnipresence. So every click that we get brings more of that into our experience. So that's what this is all about. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I'm supposed to add. A warning. Margaret the material in this class today is essentially the material in Margaret's class on mind, and the class took 2 hours to present, and she presented it off and on over 20 years to her students. And the last time she presented it in '84, when she made the tape that I heard, her comment was about the fact that none of them had gotten it yet. So get a sense of the level of your conditioning. Get a sense of how hard it is. I mean, but so don't expect to click, aha, I see it, it's all mind, and have everything change, because that's not what's going to happen. But see, it doesn't matter that you don't get it all this afternoon, because every individual piece that you get changes your experience. And along with that, it makes getting the next piece easier. And you don't have to worry about which piece you get or what truth you study. If you understand any single truth completely, you will understand them all completely. And so you work where you're working. Pick a truth and work with it. And it's very progressive. It's very progressive. I remember hearing a guy a few years ago who was essentially presenting this information, although it wasn't the class trying to present this information, but he was saying things that required understanding this information. And at that time, I had no idea what the man was talking about. The only thing I knew was that he knew and I didn't, and that his life was working a lot better than mine, and I ought to listen to it. But I knew I was just not understanding a word the man said, and kept wishing he would quit beating around the bush and say what the hell he meant. And left the class, with that information, and frustrated, and went on. And I was sitting with Robert in silence, maybe 5 years later, I don't know, after I'd been with Robert 2 or 3 years, and we're sitting in a silence. And I get this big click, and I see this. And I realize, oh, that's what the guy was saying. And then I thought about it, and what he was doing was he was saying exactly what he meant. And the problem was it was absolutely inconceivable to me. It was not in my consciousness, so I could not hear it. So that was interesting. And when I heard Margaret's tape, I heard Margaret's tape, and I just said, wow, I heard it. I heard the whole thing, and it was just so clear that I had to run down to Atlanta to tell her that and thank her, because it was so neat. So that's the way it goes, and it may come to you. Pieces of little clicks will happen at any point. There can be clicks, small clicks, big clicks, huge clicks. That's what we're working for, are these clicks. Okay, let's see if that's enough. See, my sense is that this is plenty, but I have to check to see if there's gaps, things left. So now it's silent. So now let's sit in the silence for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions. Let's let this soak in, and let the Spirit do its work now, because it's silent and it's here. Feel the presence. I have to learn to talk slower. Joel would have spent a class, a 8-session class covering that material. And Robert would have, and what they do is they say things over and over, example after example after example, and Robert would not care whether it got said or not. He would just talk about whatever he talks about until he gets done. But I haven't been doing this long enough to learn to slow down, but it's quiet now, so that's everything for today. So let's have questions or discussion or feedback or experiences or things that aren't even related to this or anything that comes up. Michael.
What if you don't? When I was young, I used to think that when you die, it was just blackness. So what if you don't study the spiritual side and spiritual consciousness and you stay in the human consciousness? What happens then? That disappears when you go on to the next plane, right? The human is...
What happens is you die with exactly the state of consciousness that you were living with, and you then take on another body with exactly the state of consciousness that you were living with, and you do it again. And again. And again. And again.
Like staying on the same stair, not progressing.
Mm-hmm. Although, every time you learn, it's not possible not to make progress, and you take all the progress with you. This is what that weird stuff in the Bible about don't save the stuff that can be eaten by moths and corruption and stuff like that. Save this, gather the stuff that's eternal. What he's talking about is work on your consciousness. The material stuff disappears, and you come in next time. And you start as one cell, or 2 cells. Every time we start there, that's what we bring in with us. But we come in with the consciousness that we had from the previous lifetime, and it's all path. And it's all process. I drank very hard for 18 years. And everybody would call that downward, when we're talking about up and down, the down part of the path and taking steps backwards and such like. But that was just as much a part of my path moving forward as sitting at Bhagwan's feet or at Robert's feet. I had to become teachable. I had to learn to a brutal extent that, because I was brutally arrogant, I had to learn to a brutal extent that I couldn't do it, that my concepts were wrong. My lovely sponsor, Susan, always says, well, there's 2 ways to do it, dear. She always says things very sweetly and calls me dear. There's 2 ways to do it, dear. She says, you can make a list of everything you think might be God and try it. Which is what we do, of course, alcohol and drugs and sex and power and gambling, and we try food, and we try everything that we can think of that might have some power, that might give us power, right? She says, you can try everything you can think of that might have power and cross them off your list one at a time. She says, don't worry, they won't work. They're not God. None of them will work as God. They're not God. And you can have all your concepts about God that you want that aren't right, Santa Claus gods or whatever God concepts you have. If it's wrong, it won't work. It will fail you. And you will learn. So, all the experiences that we go through are very necessary, progressive steps forward on the path. And God is not in a hurry. He could care less how many lifetimes it takes to do this work. God is not in a hurry. The whole thing is the experience. All the stuff is the experience. This is. If God wanted everybody enlightened, this would not be going on. There would be no such thing. But in order to have the concept of what something is, you must have the experience of the not. You can't recognize sweet without knowing sour. You can't see blue against a blue wall. You can't recognize something without knowing what it's not. So how is God to know itself? It has to know not God. Hence Leelaa. Hence this wonderful game. And it's God. Remember always that this was not God letting Lee go through those experiences so that Lee could learn something. This was God going through all those experiences. God as Lee. But it's not like you need to feel sorry for Lee or ask why did God make Lee go through all that stuff. God was doing it. It's God as Lee doing Lee's path, and God as Dulcie doing Dulcie's path. And there's no such thing as a Lee or a Dulcie around here. There's just God as, and God is doing its thing, and it's pretty wondrous.
Is that why it's necessary to be human consciousness be ignorant? That's the way that the other consciousness knows itself?
It's a way. It's the way God did it. Everything starts in ignorance. If everything started fully enlightened, then there would be no unenlightenment, and there would be.
Human consciousness is considered completely ignorant.
I'm sorry?
Human consciousness is considered completely ignorant, or we're.
No.
No.
No, we've come a long way. Think about caveman observe our concept of that. Observe the history. Of caveman days and tribal days, and human consciousness is progressing, and individuals are progressing, and periodically individuals jump way ahead. Lots of people are around us right now who are out the top. There are lots of people now. This thing is accelerating. There are just so much consciousness now, but human consciousness is catching up. But if human consciousness, if God's individual expressions were all enlightened, then the word enlightened would not have meaning, because there would be no unenlightened, or the idea of enlightened. And enlightened means oneness, means God. So if there were not God, there couldn't be God. And this, by the way, is all this stuff about God wanting to know God is just a story. But it's as good a story as any about what Leelaa is all about. And, it's something that makes sense to me. We have this need to think about things. And so I have always found, the best way I can think about it at the time. And there may be another way that I think about it at some point in the future, which is even clearer to me. And everybody wants to ask questions about, well, why is God doing this to me? And A, he's not. He's doing it to himself. And B, for his own purposes. And C, as good a reason as any is so that he can recognize who he really is. And I should be saying it instead of he. I hate using the pronoun male or female, because it certainly is not either of those, or it certainly is all of those. Yeah.
I was just going to say, one vision thing that's been working for me lately is, did you see the movie Matrix? Yeah.
No.
At the end of the movie, there's this scene where everything you see, there are these people in a hallway, and you see the walls, and then down at the end, and this guy kind of is having this flash. He's having that moment of total clarity, of being enlightened. And the scene has been created by this massive computer. And so when he gets enlightened, everything just turns into numbers. You know how the computer is just numbers going, racing? And the whole scene becomes numbers, and everything disappears, and it's just numbers. And that's all there is, and then everything just blows out, and all there is light. And that's been really working for me lately. When I look out here, I just imagine that little sequence. It's wow, it's really nothing.
Sounds great.
You talk about the two cells turning into a human being or an oak tree or whatever it may be, and if they're lucky, they reach maturity. And isn't maturity for us considered spiritual awareness? And cutting through the bullshit, isn't that just a hypnotism?
Yeah, well, the whole thing's hypnotism. The whole story about two cells and all of that. That's this body is just my current concept of Lee, and the word maturity is, has 100 meanings. Certainly, the ultimate maturity is the recognition of who you really are. But I was thinking in the time of just the sense of maturing in this particular experience.
Seems to me like, you know how we had a dream. This could be a dream. You know, we're all dreaming. You know, it's a matter of, you know, like enlightenment is awakening.
Mm-hmm.
So really and truly, this is nothing more than a dream. A dream of being separated from God, of not being part of God. And it's so neat that we're all aware of our dreams. You know what I'm saying? Chelsea and I are here in this room listening to me. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know if I have a point to really, well, you know, it's about the dream. You know, our consciousness is like one. We're sharing our consciousness.
For sure. I mean, this is a dream in the sense that a nighttime dream is enactment within consciousness. So, you know, that's the whole point of looking at dreams, is that in this has exactly the same level of reality as what I dreamed last night. It's longer, apparently. So that certainly is true, and the coherence is because there's only one mind. You know, when you get to me individually, the dream I have at night is a different dream from the one you have at night, because that's a localized thing, whereas now we're dealing with human consciousness, you know, the universal human consciousness, and that aspect of the one mind, which we can call the human mind, and there's that picture. So it's consistent.
When I was reading Course in Miracles, one of the things that really helped me was that everyone gets enlightened, it's just a matter of when.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, I never thought about until the Leelaa thing, that this is an act, that God's doing this so he knows he's God. So if this is the case, then this happens over and over and over again. We become all consciousness, and then so does this play and act that happen over and over in eternity?
If that were true, then there would be time in eternity, which there isn't. This is within time.
Because time doesn't exist only in a human.
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
Somebody once said, why did God create time? And it was so that everything didn't happen all at once. It's so that we would be in overload if we could see that everything was happening simultaneously all at once. And there is no such thing as past lives, future lives. It's all happening all at once. So it was like a loving kindness to create time so that everything wouldn't happen all at once in our mind. Could you take that right now if you could see and hear and feel everything all at once? I couldn't. I mean, I don't have an instrument capable of that at this time.
The other problem, of course, is that the minute you have duality, two,
Yep.
you have space. And space requires time. Space and time are just different attitudes about the same thing. So it's part of the lie. So the question about whether God's doing it over and over again is not a meaningful question, since that's outside of this. Plus, he seems to be doing it simultaneously infinitely many times. I mean, we got 5 billion of them going right now on this world. Who knows what's going on? It's a wonderful Leelaa. An amazing play.
Unlimited possibility.
I'm sorry?
Unlimited possibility.
Indeed.
This thing that I call reality is my consciousness. I guess that's one of the questions.
The thing that you call reality is your concept of whatever it is that God has created.
I was just thinking what Mike was saying, we got a ton of time. I couldn't conceive of everything happening at once, and maybe somebody could, and maybe for them it is happening at once. That doesn't make sense. But,
I don't think that we can conceive of things happening at once. I mean, that's not the way they appear to happen.
Those feelings we get sometimes in meditation, like, I know I've had a couple times where, maybe it was finding that silence for a split second, and having everything kind of come together and not feeling separate from anything. Is that a truth? If you feel it later, that you're not separate from anything?
You have to say whether it's a truth or not. I don't know what your experience was. When I experience truth, it is much realer to me than this. And so there's no doubt about it to me.
I know there was one time when it was just a feeling of reincarnation, and then all of a sudden just feeling like, once again, not separate from anything, only one consciousness. And then it was, once the mind came in, I started thinking about it, that was gone.
Sure.
It was history.
Yeah.
And I didn't think about it for a couple of weeks. I mean, I thought about it the next day a little bit, and it was something that kind of comes and goes, and it seems to be more present in my daily life.
The experience, you can't remember the experience. Truth is not something that can be remembered. Either you're experiencing it or you're not. You can remember that you had the experience of truth, but truth is a now thing. Truth is outside of time. You can have what appears, if time works the other way, you can have what appears to be a 1 second experience of truth and discover by your watch that 5 hours went away, or 20 minutes or something like that.
So my understanding is there's usually two types of truth. There's the truth that you're experiencing, and there's the universal truth. Or there's one the same?
There is one truth, and that is the mystical experience of oneness. Everything else is bullshit. Except that it's, in the sense of the finger pointing to the moon, it's trying, it's doing the best it can, but there is an experience, the experience of oneness is the truth, the silence, the oneness, the not. Careful, Ed.
yes.
The truth and Lee are mutually exclusive. When there's no Lee and no thoughts, then I'm in it. And thinking about it is not it, of course.
As far as the difference between being spirit and being human. And if you meditate, we're closer to our spirit. As you're meditating, you lose that time and space. You get closer to the truth, love, oneness. But as spirits, we're actually awakening.
That's the purpose of meditation, is to get more in touch with that, and less in touch with with what we call humanhood. Well, let's be quiet for a couple of minutes. Thank you.